Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of dialogues on ethics education for children, where we'll be discussing with special guests about their personal and community experiences on values, ethics, religion, spirituality, education, with the purpose to reflect on the role of education to contribute to the flourishing of humankind. And today I'm very privileged to have as our first guest Dr. Kezevino Aram joining us from India. And I will not maybe introduce Vinu in the traditional way. Vinu is a mentor, is a friend, is an inspiring colleague and a leader. And I would say that the best way to introduce Vinu is to say that she is a peacemaker. And in the deepest sense of the word, Vinu, I think the world and the people around you are privileged to have a human being with so much commitment to service, to others, and to the work that you do. And I think that reflects, in a way, Vinu, when we think of ethics education and what also we want children to develop in terms of knowledge, attitudes, skills, but particularly these attitudes towards others is the sense of commitment and ethical demand towards justice for others, the human dignity of each and every one. So thank you, Vinu, for being here with us. And I just want to start, Vinu, you are coming from India, so you can maybe share with us what is it, or what was it like growing up in India?
You know, Maria Lucia, India is often referred to as a subcontinent, both in terms of the size of the country, but also in terms of the cultures, the languages, the diversity that defines India. And I grew up in one of the smallest states of India called Nagaland. If you look at the world map and look at Myanmar in this side, on the other side is this very tiny state of Nagaland. I grew up in Nagaland. My father and my mother were part of the peace movement there. In fact, one of the lasting contributions of my father to this wonderful country, India, was the peace accord he brokered between the armed underground rebels of Nagaland and government of India. Growing up in Nagaland really was very special. In the midst of pristine nature, I mean, anywhere you turned around, nature was there to accompany you, but also accompanied with a cultural thread of India that is not often spoken about, where gender equality was there, where the tribal communities of Nagaland were as much a part of India as were the rest of India, which is often showcased as mainstream India. I grew up in this little town. The whole of the state, even as late as 2000, was just 2 million people. So it's a very tiny state. I was born there. I was born in Kohima. My name is from the Angami tribe, and I'm very proud of it. Every time I wait for a question to be asked, what does this name mean? Also, I think it was the beginning for me to see both the value of peace in the midst of strife and violence. And on the other hand, something that I took for granted as a young girl in Nagaland, but now as I grow in my life, in my work, in my leadership, I know it's not a given, not just in India, in anywhere of the world, in any part of the world, gender equality. And I grew up a happy girl, singing, studying, being, I think, a very silent witness to my parents' hard work, to the hard work of the Nagaland peace movement. And so I would say at some level it was a normal childhood in a wonderful home, and at some level it was a slice of history that I was witnessing without knowing the intensity of it fully. It's so wonderful, Maria Lucia, that you have given me an opportunity to call myself a peacemaker. I do see every practical work that I do as a contribution to that large dream or the large vision of building peaceful societies. But I have to tell you, one of my first professional assignments coming back from Harvard was being appointed as the lead consultant for the very first human development report for United Nations, for the United Nations Development Program. And they wanted someone who was an insider, outsider, who knew Nagaland and its diversity, but was also able to step back. And it was, it was again a reminder of how open and how egalitarian the Naga society is. I was presenting the draft report to the Chief Minister of the state, and he said, "Why didn't you present it to the Nagaland Assembly?" Remember, he was telling this to a young professional who was doing the first human development report. Of course, fresh from Harvard, my mind immediately ran to what the presentation could look like. But what I realized was the welcome to the participation of young people, and introducing me at the State Assembly. I still remember the words echo in my ears. He said, "Kezevino's presence here is a reminder of a second generation contribution to peace building in Nagaland." So Maria Lucia, thank you for taking me back to my childhood. Thank you also for, I think, allowing me to be mindful of the gifts that I took from Nagaland and then took it alongside me as I crisscrossed India, but also as I grew up in my work and my experience.
Thank you, Vino. And I mean, you mentioned your parents, and you mentioned this environment that you grew up with, this egalitarian society in the midst of, a very diverse and maybe at times unequal society in India. And tell me more about your parents, Vino. I think when we hear about your parents, you are the reflection of those values also that they provided to you. But I want to hear more of, a little bit of who were there and, who grew up with you.
I call my father Appa, the Tamil word for a father, and I called my mother Ma. Ma was from Bengal. So there was, in their union, in the way that our family came together, there was a beautiful blend of the south and the east of India. They were like any other parent, very present for their children, very engaged in the way they set up their family and built their family. What I also learned, my brother and I, Ashok and I learned very early, was that in their life there was very little division between what we would today call professional life and personal life. For them, life was a continuum, whether it was in terms of living their ethics, whether in terms of how they saw a day. So in a day, in their 24 hours, the society had a share and family had a share. So for them, it was a continuum. And what I saw, and maybe I'll just take a minute, what I saw, I think most importantly in my parents, was the joy they had in doing what they were doing. There was a great sense of history. My father would always say, "This is the first time we're doing it. Vinu, do you remember? We never had this before." There was this sense of history, so they were building something, but there was also this sense of joy. They did it very lightly. And only as I grew older and in the physical absence of my father, and as I read him, I realized his contributions. He was a young man of 21 when India won independence, 20 actually, and he finished his PhD in 1955 in educational psychology. Creative thinking and conceptualization were his areas of research and work. And I realized that he saw his educational training as a platform for empowerment, not just for himself, Maria Lucia. He set up the first teachers training college in this city. I did not realize when he was telling me, this is for Tamil Nadu. Remember, this was free India, not having enough teachers to be deployed to its schools where children were to get education. That's my father. His academic training was deeply embedded in an India that he dreamt of, an India where everybody had a place. But also, I think he visualized himself, and this was the beauty of his generation. Each of them, and I've met many people who have contributed to India's success, they visualized themselves as a co-architect of that India that they were dreaming of. My mother, Maria Lucia, on the other hand, was full of life, very present. I mean, remember, she was managing a household where doors never closed. And meal times, we could never say there were 4 people. There were anything from 10 to 20. Our doors were open. So here was a wonderful mother, but an equally, I think, gracious woman who was living her leadership in such a beautiful style. And I think as I grow older, I'm always happy to remember them together. The picture is incomplete without either one of them. They complemented each other's strengths. My mother was intuitive, ready to go. She was like, let's do it. And my father was reflective. Theory was his best friend, and application was it. Now, I think one thing to take away from this was they chose to have a child. They chose to have 2 children. So for them, family and building a family was a very active choice. And having made that decision, I think, till their last breath, they gave me and my brother such love, but such learnings of life. And therefore, to me, that wonderful phrase of Mahatma Gandhi, in the way that he saw education, is so important. Education is for life. That's the formal education my father got, I got, my mother got. But education is through life. The classroom of life that begins in the embrace of a family. Through life. And then I think what they left us with is to remember never to be static, never to forget that life is to be learned on a real-time basis, to be curious, to be wanting to always know what the other person is doing. And so it was a beautiful, simple family that I grew up in, always rich in experience, in love, in abundance, but always simple. The menu in my house has not changed, Maria Lucia. It's a tribute to my mother and my grandmother. It's a very simple menu on our tables every day, but the doors are always open. That's another lesson that I keep. And Maria Lucia, you know and I know, keeping doors open is more than the physical act of keeping a door open. It means to be able to welcome the other as yourself. It means sometimes to step back and say, let me take a little bit of time to understand this new visitor in my house. It's also to remember, even within that physical construction of a house and a home, that the universe is indeed our shared home. And therefore, these little physical constructions are a very limited way of looking at what the world has to offer. So I love them. Appa and Ma are my constant companions in every step that I take, and in every young couple that I see. I hope they will have the joy of being parents to wonderful children.
That's very beautiful, Vino. And growing up in Colombia in a context of violence, in a context of also a lot of structural violence, poverty, I also see this value of how families can become a shield for children when they grow up in environments that are so unequal. And I think that reflection that you have, Vino, makes me think about that. I was shielded from, what was a violent environment out there. And as you said, it's the environment, it's those values that are inculcated and the presence, being there available for you, but being there willing to continue, not just being professionals, but being parents 24 hours a day and being professionals 24 hours a day. And I think that takes me also on what you were saying on values. You talk about this openness, embracing the hospitality part. If you were to choose, Vino, 1 or 2 values that you think, from the upbringing that you had, from your parents, the community around, that you have taken with you all your life and that continue to be, a principle in your life, what would be those 2 values?
There are many, Maria Lucia, but if you ask me to pick 2, I think mutual respect. My parents modeled it. They modeled it in the way they respected each other. It's never a perfect family, but they tried and lived that commitment to mutual respect. In the way my father always asked, what do you think, Vino? What do you think, Vino? And even from the beginning, when Appa asked me this question, I felt I had something to give. I have never stopped asking any child that I meet, what do you think? So respect, mutual respect is one thing that I would hold very close to my heart as a gift from my parents. I think I will also hold the value of responsibility. Very early, not just my parents, Maria Lucia, their generation, very early, responsibility was a lived value. They would say, you have this talent, you can speak, you can write, you can do math, you can sing, and immediately they would say, your gift is not your gift. I say this to so many young people, there'll always be a line in their text, you belong to the world. And the reason I say this is because you become mindful of your gifts. You become mindful that if you are invested with this talent, if God has blessed you with this grace, you can't be small in the way you look at life and your contribution. And that is empowering, Maria Lucia, to if you start thinking of it at 5 and 6 and 7, not just your audit statement in terms of what you want to live and what you want to contribute to the footprint, but also in the way that you prepare yourself. You prepare yourself not for 8 hours of work, you prepare yourself for 70 years of contribution to a country. And I think so these two values, mutual respect at a very fundamental human level and responsibility as a way that you use your skill to advance the common good.
Very, very nice, Vinu. And that maybe takes me to you going to the US and study health and child health. What moved you to go to the US and what moved you to study health?
There are no doctors in my family, Maria Lucia, no doctors that I knew. One of the things very early on I experienced growing up in our household was the freedom of choice. The Human Development Report that I spoke about, the fundamental principle of that is expanding human capacities. So there was always choice. And my father would say, there is a consequence to your decision, whatever you want to do. So I moved from Nagaland to Tamil Nadu. My father was vice chancellor of a university in America, you say president of a university. And at that time when I was completing the 10th grade, which is high school here, all students of Tamil Nadu had to choose whether they wanted to go to medicine or engineering, and our subjects were chosen like that. My father was, again, very matter of fact, and he and my mother said, whatever you choose to study, it's your wish. But you must remember, even those days, and now it's even worse, Maria Lucia, getting into these schools required, a certain level of academic proficiency. Said, you choose, but remember that choice, you have to put in the hard work for that. But the reason I chose medicine was when I was much younger, 11 and 12, I had moved from Nagaland, and I told you that the positive experience of Nagaland moved with me to Tamil Nadu, which is my father's state and a wonderful state of Tamil Nadu. It was very different. The language was different. The weather was different. I was 10 and 11 and I started hearing girls do this and boys do that. I had hit puberty. It was a moment of sort of physical change in my life. And somebody who comforted me and welcomed me and gave me a little time on the Sundays was the Chancellor of the university, Dr. T.S. Soundram. She actually went on to become the Union Minister of Education of India in the first cabinet. And she would bring her nice car on Sunday to introduce me to this part of India. She would say, come on in Tamil, va va yen kuda va. And I would jump in. And there was nothing special. I would just shadow her. And in her lunchbox, there was a little lunchbox for me. She was the first one who started speaking for health. And I was 11 and 12. She said health for all. And she was in the midst of a public health experiment in Atur block, which is a cluster of villages around Gandhigram in Tamil Nadu, where they were looking at the demographic experience of people. Remember at that time when I was 11 and 12, India was speaking of this population bomb. We thought the problem is population and increased population. Today we know it's not that. It's not the numbers of people, but it's the quality of governance, it's the way you engage and educate people. So she was my inspiration, and I am so grateful to her for dropping these seeds. And Maria Lucia, I will not want to be any other professional but a healthcare provider. Being a physician, having these professional skills to work with children, I think is the gift that being a doctor has given me.
Vino, and I think that gift that you have upheld so dearly, but also with the highest responsibility also, as you said, has benefited many people and children and in the community, but I think has also been recognized as well in many levels. And I know that you recently received an award by the Harvard T.A. Chan Award on medical practice from the Harvard School of Public Health, and that you are the first Indian to receive this award, Vinu. How does it feel to be the first Indian to receive this award? But in your trajectory as a health practitioner, what does this mean for you at this moment of your life, and I think in the midst of a pandemic as well?
Two things, Maria Lucia. I know I will not be the last Indian. There'll be many more young, bright professionals from India added to that scroll of honor. So I think it's just the first step, and I think there'll be many more. It does bring me a lot of joy, and I must say a lot of encouragement to my team at Shanti Ashram and the Center for Child and Public Health. We have worked non-stop, Maria Lucia. I think this probably was one moment in my professional life and in my leadership experience where I had to turn up to life every day. I had to turn up to uncertainties every day. And having the support of previous experiences working with the community, having the opportunity to influence and be part of policy work before, having an infrastructure that could implement work, all of these were not created overnight. But what we did very creatively during the pandemic was we found convergence in the way we could respond. And therefore, this award and this recognition coming from the Harvard T.A. Chan School of Public Health is so meaningful. For any student, receiving it from your own alma mater is special. But this is an award for leadership in public health practice. Both dimensions, one of bringing public health principles into active practice, two, to be able to operate from the local to the global. And here, Maria Lucia, my world comes together. It's not in compartments. My inspiration has always been Mahatma Gandhi's vision of Sarvodaya, the progress of everybody. And intertwined in that has been the attention to the last and the least, whoever is vulnerable. Otherwise, progress doesn't happen. You have unequal achievements and unequal growths. That's one side. And that inspiration was the inspiration that allowed us to work during the pandemic. And the second is the gift of the 21st century to many young women like me who not only pursued higher education, who not only excelled in what they did, but who today have an opportunity, Maria Lucia, like you and me, to lead. This was not a given in the 20th century. When the Spanish flu happened, there weren't as many women leaders. So the coming together and a recognition in both, one being able to implement public health principles, and another living my inspiration, living what I believe in, that everybody matters. And this is where, Maria Lucia, I think if I may add one more thing, it's the continuity of the experience from Nagaland to Gandhigram, to Coimbatore, to Harvard, and to the world, is that it's not in these dramatic moments that your work is recognized. It's in the hard work of every hour, every day, that you build, I think, what is stable, what is solid, what is significant for your community. So I am a big fan, Maria Lucia, of the miracle of everyday work. I believe I should turn up to work every day, and that work I should do. It's my job to do that work. And that's the same thing I tell my team. Every morning, you must believe what you do is important to society, to the child in front of you, but even the invisible child. I mean, if I may take a minute more, Maria Lucia, beyond public health, this is the first time in recent history 1.5 billion children were affected by the pandemic. Schools have just reopened in India after 500 days. Yet they were not the visible face of the pandemic. Imagine, Maria Lucia, in the first 1,000 days, the child's brain is growing rapidly. Theoretically, it was always possible for a disruption in early childhood. But we see this for the first time. that 500 days can be robbed off these 1,000 days. So, I had evidence on one side, I had inspiration on one side, I had a wonderful community to belong and to work together, and of course, that eternal call to live one's responsibility in the miracle of everyday work, not in the big dramatic moments. But I'm very grateful for this award. It's brought back lots of my teachers, my friends, and as my mentor at Harvard, Dr. Roberta Gianfortoni told me, she said, it's a refresh button in your life. And I hope this refresh button will prepare me for the next 20 years of my life.
And Vino, you said it's an award for leadership. And I think that what we have seen, your leadership during these, many years, also as you mentioned now, the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic in India, your leadership leading Shanti Ashram, and a recognition of the great work that Shanti Ashram has been doing. So what is Shanti Ashram? I think many people can describe Shanti Ashram in many different ways. An NGO, civil society organization, a faith-inspired organization. But I want to see, and I want to hear from you, what is that makes Shanti Ashram different? What is that happens, and that magic that I think happens when I have visited Shanti Ashram is like entering an oasis of peace, in the real sense of the word, and Shanti Ashram. What is it? What makes it, that magical place where all these things happen in service of the community and humanity?
Maria, I like the definition that the founders gave Shanti Ashram. It's a creative laboratory, and I refuse to be boxed. I refuse to be called governmental, non-governmental, religious. It's a creative laboratory, and our founders wrote these beautiful lines saying, Shanti Ashram was a creative laboratory where the problems of the people's problems, will invite us and challenge us to find solution together. And therefore, Maria Lucia, I think everybody has a role when it comes to the progress of people. And at Shanti Ashram, the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi, of course, is at the very heart. What I see here is also a welcome, that culture of openness to say, can we work together? In every organization, we choose a few areas: women, children, young people, as demographic components of a society. We have chosen sustainable development, public health, and we've chosen peace building and children's education. So the thematic areas and the constituencies together. The magic of Shanti Ashram, I think, is always connecting to the core vision. What are people's problems? What are people's problems? And Maria, during the pandemic, I had this wonderful dialogue at Shanti Ashram with somebody called Dr. Nitya Rao. She's a gender specialist and working around. She had a very, very nice observation on women's empowerment. She said, if you see what is accompanying globalization and the modern way of doing business, is also a focus and a pursuit of individual success and progress. And I think, like she said, nothing should take that away. I think every woman, every man, every young person, boy or girl, has a dream. And that's why in the Hindu tradition, we say, you have a purpose, you have a reason that you've come into this planet, and live it and progress. But Nitya said something more. She, as a good academician, told me, all the big critical changes in history has always come when the collective has been together. When we as people find the patience to hear one another, when we as a human family understand and understand very actively by listening and by dialoguing and by articulating for ourselves, what is it that we want as the next frontier? And that is a collective. And so, Maria Lucia, I think at Shanti Ashram, I think part of the magic is very simple. Individuals, young people who come in, be wanting to contribute to India's development and the world's progress, they have an individual journey that they can see and they can enjoy. They can also find partners, colleagues. We underestimate the value of a community. I mean, during the pandemic, I think there has been renewed respect for the collectives, whether it's a family, whether it is a neighborhood, whether it is a nation, whether it's a global family. I think the collective is so important. So that beautiful harmony between the I and the we. Marisa, allow me to say one story, okay? I remember going to Harvard and joining one big practical problem, even after finishing postgraduate studies in India. Today, young people are on every gadget. And I must say, without young people, I'll be a bit lost when it comes to technology. But when I arrived at Harvard, everything was online. And I, in India at that time, was still writing my postgraduate papers handwritten. I turned in my papers. And the first day or two, I was flabbergasted. I was like, I needed help for everything. So I called my mother and I said, I feel like an illiterate because I didn't know how to use technology. And for 6 weeks, you must know, Maria Lucia, I spent 3 weeks at the computer lab and equipped myself with the language of the 21st century. Similarly, in the first 2-3 days of class, I was so disturbed because every time in introduction, they would say, so what did you do? What was your commitment? And I would answer, we did this and we did that. And I remember one of my professors, Dr. Richard Cash, who was part of the team that discovered the oral rehydration solution for the world. He said, I want to know not what your team has done. We're trying to find what you have done. I felt pushed to a corner, Maria Lucia. I felt they were even questioning, that was not the intention, but even whether they were questioning. And I came back and called my mother, the mother-daughter conversation, and I said, Ma, I am so uncomfortable saying I have said more I's in my life than I've ever said before. And she, Maria Lucia, like a mother, she said, what's the problem? Remember the story of Sri Ramakrishna from the Ramakrishna, the mystic teacher of India? Said, Ramakrishna said, there is no problem with the I, whether it's the small lettered I or the capital I, as long as there was no ego. So these lessons of life, Maria Lucia, I think is also something that we live at Shanti Ashram. I think once we started serving 250,000 people, we said our goal is not to become one of the larger organizations in the world. We'll continue to be a creative laboratory. We'll work with others. It made us more open. It made us more creative. It made us more collaborative. But also what it did was it allowed us to see, what is our relevance in society. And 35 years later, Maria Lucia, as president of Shanti Ashram, I can say we are very relevant to the progress of India and to the world.
And you are. I think I have been a witness to this, Vinu. And I like this one you say, this individual and collective. I think in our societies, and I think more in our countries in the global south, we privilege more the collective, and because the family is the most important unit in society. It's more this sense of distance also between people doesn't exist at times, and I experienced that as well in my own country and in my own region. But I like that teaching in a way and that learning about the individual is important when there is no ego attached to that. And I think that's maybe perhaps one of the main learnings when it comes to the empowerment of children and young people, that they work in the collective, but they develop their own sense of self, their own sense of identity, and they also proud to contribute in their individual capacity to that collective. So, and that takes me, Vinu, to the work that Shanti Ashram has been doing on ethics education for children. And we have been working together for many years, and Shanti Ashram has been a pioneer of implementing at a very programmatic level ethics education for children. And from the work that we have been doing in the Office of Ethics Education, we always think of Shanti Ashram as the best example in a way of implementation of learning to live together, ethics education, because of several areas that you work with, because it's not just the programmatic level, but it's the training of educators and young facilitators that you have, the leadership of several of the people in Shanti Ashram, starting with Vijay and the great work that he has done with young people, is how it is embedded in the community and the practice. It is how it is much integrated. We see it in everything that you do in Shanti Ashram. and we see, oh, this is what we call success in implementing ethics education for children. But I want to hear from you, Vinu, why, similar to the question of the magic of Shanti Ashram, what has been the formula, in a way, to have a successful implementation of ethics education in Shanti Ashram, with all the impact we have seen in many children and young people? What is the formula around this, Vinu?
Marcia, I think it's an important question that you ask. Allow me to answer it in 4 parts. It begins with commitment, Maria Lucia. It begins with the fundamental commitment that every child matters. Every child matters. And what a blessing for India and for this part of the world that we have so many young children in our midst. We know societies where the numbers of children are coming, it's not the same. The color of life sometimes is not there in the way that it can be. So every child matters. I think that's the commitment. Having said that, I think there's this beautiful way of looking at what are your areas of concern and what are your areas of influence. Resources are finite, human resource is finite. What you can do is limited to what you know. So we did this very early in our work. And we came both with an understanding that the governmental infrastructure in India was doing a lot for children per se. Remember when India won independence, I wouldn't be able to tell you accurately, but I think about 60% of India could not read and write, or formally what we say, were not literate. Today it's come down to 20%, 20-30%. So we were cognizant of the fact that the government is a big player and it's a fundamental right of the government to be doing this for people. We picked up the most vulnerable amongst us. So within that framework, we picked up the most vulnerable, and we kept doing it. Our children's program is in the 30th year, Maria Lucia. Again, I think not just a success story to share, but I think a learning to share that the work for children can't stop in 5 and 10 years. It's not a project mode. It's a generational commitment. And till you see what is, if I may dare say, an equitable platform for children to take off. So I think the commitment that every child matters, the understanding that within the areas of your concerns, you find an area of influence. The third thing is, I think you start looking at how you should be doing it. And this is where the creativity of Shanti Ashram came. Schools were starting, schools were happening, elementary schools and high school. The missing piece was early childhood in the beginning. And so Shanti Ashram went to village after village after village in the most vulnerable communities and started working with families when children were 2, and spent 2 full years in preparing them for this long educational journey. In families where people have not gone to university, that's a long commitment, 15 years, 18 years, 20 years, before you can bring back some tangible income to your family. So this early childhood piece, again, like areas of concern and areas of influence, the principle of complementarity, to support one another in the way that the child is at the center, not your expertise, not your infrastructure. What do children and what does a child need? That's even today, Maria Lucia, this is our 30th year. I love our early childhood centers. I almost have this sense that we are building a generation for India each time. So we took this, and once we find an area, Maria Lucia, there is no difference between what people do in one part of the world. Quality is universal. Theory is universal. The way you discipline yourself to the rigor of implementing programs, I think is important. It cannot be poor quality for poor people. That's a lesson I learned very, very early in the Gandhian movement. If at all you speak of quality, you have to speak of the highest quality for the most vulnerable, because that is where the bridging will happen. So I think our success is because of long-term commitment, is the fundamental faith that every child matters, quality at the highest level, but doing it at the critical stages where gaps were there. And now, if I may use the socio-epidemiological model, of course we will all say that the parents are the most intimate layer. And Maria Lucia, recalling my own parents, I realize how valuable that is. But not every family is ideal. Not every family is the most nurturing in the intimate circle, and therefore the next layers become important for a child. Society can step in, government can step in, organizations like us can step in. So that big picture and the small picture are always part of us. We've also, I think, done something which maybe is part of that, I might not say formula, but the approach and the ethics of pursuing child development. And that is, the coming together of theory and practice and a dynamic praxis. And this is very, very consciously and mindfully transferred to the next generation of staff, to the next generation of parents, to the next generation of volunteers. So at the ashram we say, for a child to grow fully and to flourish, to borrow a word from you, not just grow but to flourish, we have to support the child, because like you said, the child is here with the potential and the possibility of finding their individuality, but you assist the parents and you assist the community, because the child also has this relational aspects of identity. And one piece at a time, we are doing about 70,000 children, and through the partnership platform that we dedicated in the 25th year, we have seen that many such beautiful pieces across India are aggregating, because the goal is shared, giving every child a healthy, a hopeful, and a happy start to life.
This is a very interesting view on the child at the center. I think you talk about several other pieces, the complementarity, but this child at the center, like holding kind of these all programmatic areas, I think is what also I see in the programmatic work that we have the privilege to work with you in some programs and areas. And I think in relation to this being on the child at the center, when we think of the ethics education programs that you have developed, the implementation of the learning to live together, the training, and this, how do you see having the child at the center, the ethics education, more programmatic work that you do with empowerment of young people? How does this, how this has impacted in a way the children that you work with, because you have been doing this for 12, 13 years and even more before, but in terms of the programmatic on learning to live together, and you have been following many children and young people throughout this period. How do you see the impact? How do you see maybe the changes? How do you see the multiplying effects in a way, in the way that you work?
Lucia, allow me now to pause and take a critical view as how education is serving the needs of children. Like I said, the early way of looking at education was a deficit model, which is, can you read, can you write, can you comprehend? And we define literacy like that, read, write. So the formal system responded to that, and in many ways was structured around this. Getting children to school was a battle in itself, and then these things happened. As it unfolded with a generation and more than a generation of children, we realized these 3 R's were not enough. The reading, the writing, and putting things to memory. And we also realized in this model that we were not actually responding to the potential of the child. And therefore, without taking much time, what I feel in the 21st century, we're at a moment today. I mean, even in many states of India today, we speak of 100% school enrollment, which means every child who needs to get to school is getting to school. Huge achievement of the 20th century. People always forget to look at these milestones that we are crossing together. But in the 21st century, particularly we have, because we have so much in terms of global resource and wealth, we also have dynamic evidence about the limitation of this kind of model. I think, and I think for me the last straw was the pandemic. When schools were shut, we suddenly felt learning stopped. It needn't be that way. And so I feel, Maria Lucia, that there has to be now a readjustment, a reconfiguration of education and learning spaces. I think the family is a very important learning space, not just for values, but practical life skills. How do you cook for yourself? How do you maintain a house? How do you do that? You learn how to live together in a family space, even when it's, it's not the most ideal setting. Also, I think we've forgotten what we can learn from a community. How to share resources, how to keep public spaces clean and well. I mean, we saw this during the pandemic when your garbage was not cleaned off. People thought, oh my God, what's going to happen? But we have practices in the community that can do that. We have ways in looking long term, meaning not just in today, but for the next generation, if there has to be enough water and this. Of course, there's formal education. So I may say in the triangulation of these learning spaces for a child, and many children who have done well, many countries that have done well, many cultures that have fostered this sort of comprehensive and cohesive approach to learning, I think we'll have to sit down together. Mutual respect, again, Maria Lucia, mutual respect for each other, and to look at each other as partners. I think ethics education is actually a golden thread connecting all the learning spaces. Because I think the ethical responsibility of a formal learner in a school is not just for these immediate math and science and physics. I think if a teacher or a group of teachers spend 8 hours, which is 1/3 of the time in a day with a child, that teacher has to model also the way the child should approach the world, truthfully, humbly, openly, curiously. So there's a role for the teacher, and ethics education can be a reminder there. In the family, I always tell parents, when I was in active pediatric practice, now I'm not, but when I'm in active pediatric practice, I would tell parents, and they would always have a big smile. I would say, remember, your child is not going to listen to what you're saying. Only if you do it, will they do it. And that's probably a collective opportunity for parents to become better human beings and children to have living role models at home. Again, ethics education comes to play, because it's not about perfection and the journey to be perfect human beings, but it's also the journey of introspection. It's a journey of saying, of humility and recognizing that I am not perfect, so let me not project all the perfect dreams on my child. Again, ethics education, how fathers and mothers relate to one another, asymmetry of power, lack of mutual respect. Children will model exactly that. They will know that when a child disagrees, physical response is probably one way to do it. But if they see their parents discussing, there was a moment 2 years ago, or a little over 2 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I was with my brother and my nephew Aditya, and Aditya came running to his father and said, "Appa, I have a question." And my brother said, "Aditya, I'm playing with your sisters. Can I come back and answer your question?" Aditya ran back and sat on the dining table in a chair waiting for his father. It brought back memories from our childhood when my father was in a public office and had responsibilities. Every time we went to him with a question, he would say, "Vinu, I'm in the middle of something, but can I come back to you?" And he came back each time to sit across the table, eye to eye contact, and here was a second generation. So again, I think ethics education, to me, if I summarize, Maria Lucia, and this is why we integrated it at Shanti Ashram over a decade ago, is the moral compass that you give a child. The ethical standards that you want society to thrive in, but the ethical standards that are built by individual commitments of human beings and collectively as communities to say, this is how we want to live together. And that moral compass, I think, can be built both by absorbing from the environment, taking in from lived experiences, but Maria Lucia, it can be taught, it can be shared, it can be learned, it can be practiced, and all of these are valid ways of learning. And I think, therefore, for me, ethics education is not a non-formal or a co-curricular activities. It is at the heart of human life, education and learning.
Vinu, and this in a way summarizes from your personal experiences on the things that you shared, your family, creating the space, giving you the the freedom in a way to make decisions and be responsible, the nourishment that you got. And when you talk about ethics education, I see it, reflected in this upbringing that you had, but I see it also, as you mentioned, as this continuum in an organization at the programmatic level, but also in our own lives, right? It's not just a classroom, a subject that we take. It's not just a one teaching that we get from an elder, from our parents, but it's the living with those values. It's how we take those responsibilities, how we uphold these collective responsibilities and ethical demands. And I like this conclusion, because at the end of the day, when we talk about ethics education, and going back to how I started, is this flourishing of the humankind. And I see that in Shanti Ashram, in particular, we have seen the flourishing of many young people throughout the 35 years of work that you have done, but because the child is at the center. And the many children that you have worked, the many volunteers and young people are a reflection of many experiences in their lives in the school, but also the contribution and complementarities that I think that you have brought into their lives. And that brings me to children and young people. And we have talked about empowerment, and you have mentioned the word empowerment in your own personal experiences and upbringing. And so with this, I know that you have worked with many children and young people. I would like to introduce one of the young people that you are working with, but I would like you, Vino, to introduce Ramya, who will join us in a minute. But I also want you to reflect maybe in a very few seconds or a minute or so, Vino, to reflect on the role that young people play, and how ethics education helps their empowerment, helps them to be seen and being heard. So with this, I turn to you to introduce Ramya, but also your reflections in these connections, Vino.
Maria Lucia, very early in my professional work, I realized you can't work only for children, meaning you can't always be only delivering services for children. If you want to bring change in an augmented way, in a scaled up way, you have to work actively with children. And working as a medical doctor closely with children, I realized there are very, very simple ways in which you can equip yourself, dialogue, to listen and to share, to be able to observe together. You don't need words all the time, to observe together and then see what was the experience in totality. Maria Lucia, I will break it into two pieces. One is in Shanti Ashram for 35 years. The participation of young people and children have been central. And when I say participation of children and young people, it doesn't happen automatically. It's a relationship, it is a nurturing, it's a cultivation of a way of working. So all of us have to give up a little bit. There's an unlearning to happen in the way that we work, and there's a learning to happen when we work with children. We've actively pursued it. During the pandemic, I felt it was for me an opportunity to work with over 100 young leaders. And this to me is very special, Maria Lucia. Some of you, like you, Maria Lucia, like my brother Ashok, you have children and you see them from birth to where they're growing. People like me also have another way of accompanying children in their growth and progress. I believe when a child comes in front of me, God gives me that child for that minute or that second, for that one moment. And so children and a child has always allowed me to live life for the moment fully. And during the pandemic with these 100 young people, I felt I reconnected to the core of my commitment. And among some of these young people, I was very lucky to have some bright minds, absolutely bright minds, who all you needed was just a question, what do you think? And the answers came, the same question that my father asked. Or some you could say, how can we serve the community? And they had the answers. And some would say, if we would ask, how do you want children to be supported? They would have the answers. So in this backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the collateral benefits of working at Shanti Ashram with my wonderful team at International Center for Child and Public Health and Shanti Ashram has been this community of young leaders. I feel this was God's grace and an opportunity for me to invest into a group of young people who will be future leaders. And one such bright leader, she gives me tuition classes on Friday on any topic that I want to learn. She's there working with me long hours. Ramya is part of that wonderful collective of these 100+ young people who showed leadership potential and who were our colleagues working together. So I'm very proud to share this time with you, Maria Lucia. You were one of them, Maria Lucia, 20 years ago. I felt the same connect with you, that we had a shared commitment, but we were growing together as well. So in that same mold of young and bright and committed and gifted leaders, I would like to introduce not just this lovely community at Shanti Ashram, but as one of its representatives, Ramya Devaraj, who's my colleague at times, my boss at times, and my dialogue discussant at times. So, Ramya.
Ramya, welcome. And I'm very glad to hear this introduction from Vinu, and particularly now when she's talking about this praxis and these reflections that she has now brought to us. And you have been a face in a way during the pandemic for Shanti Ashram. I have seen you so many times in so many webinars, bringing your perspective, bringing your wisdom as well, Ramya. And I always wonder what brought Ramya to Shanti Ashram. And so maybe if you can share a little bit about that, Ramya, what brought you to Shanti Ashram, what motivated you to come to Shanti Ashram?
Absolutely. Thank you, Maria Lucia, and thank you to Dr. Vinu as well for that humbling introduction. So this is not my first stint at Shanti Ashram. I came here for the first time when I was 13 years old on an internship. And Dr. Vinu at that time as well was generous enough to let this little girl come into her organization and give me real work. I remember doing real studies, collecting real data, and writing a report, just 1 or 2 pages long, but it was still analysis that she guided me through. And in some ways, that was the foundation, and those were the building blocks to the person that I am today. Because I think Shanti Ashram was the first place where I saw, lived out, the power of collective responsibility in shaping a better world for us all. And that's not just a motto or a tagline in Shanti Ashram, it's a lived ethos. And I think what Dr. Aram said about the generational commitment to health for all, the generational commitment to uplifting children, the generational commitment to uplifting the most vulnerable in our community is a lived ethos in Shanti Ashram. So that was my introduction to this organization, and I've been here many years since. But during the pandemic in 2020, I was just finishing my master's in London, and I had come back to India. And I think I was professionally as well at a crossroads. I had studied marketing and I wanted to work in the public-private partnership space because I saw the immense potential that Dr. Vinu talked about, the importance of governance and government. And we often find fault with our governments, but we must understand that they have the largest implementation infrastructure in the world to do developmental work. And on the other side, we do know that the private sector has the resources, has the expertise, has the personnel to bring that change about as well. So I wanted to work at that intersection, and I wanted advice from my mentor. So I arrived at Shanti Ashram, I remember, in September of 2020, right when I was submitting my master's dissertation. And I sat down with Dr. Vinu and I asked her what I should do. And very casually she said, as she has said to hundreds of young people over the course of her life, come and spend a few weeks with me, we'll figure it out. Those few weeks have turned into what will next month be 1 full year at Shanti Ashram. And I work here now in the capacity of a research associate. And it has been one of the most fulfilling and wonderful experiences of my life. Because I think that, of course, being in this environment and being associated with Dr. Vinu and working so closely with her, but also Dr. Vinu talked about her childhood growing up in Nagaland at the center of this very important moment in history. I feel like I am in a similar moment now, in the middle of this pandemic to have the opportunity to work at the grassroots level in rural India, which was hit so badly by the COVID-19 pandemic. I feel like the work that I have been doing has been rewarding, it has been fulfilling, but it has also been incredibly important. So what brought me to this organization year after year was Dr. Vinu. What kept me here was also her, but in addition, the incredible work that we have managed to do. The last 550 days, as Dr. Vinu said, we have shown up to work every day. And every day has been a blessing. We are so privileged to still be here, being able to work. And I do not take that lightly.
Very, very inspiring, Ramya. And I'm thinking that, you come from the marketing field and you come to Shanti Ashram in the midst of this pandemic. How has it been for you to be fully immersed in the grassroots work in the midst of this pandemic? And I'm saying this with that in mind of what we were talking about, of this praxis and theory. But we know that when you combine both things, there is something that emerges out of it, which you have been doing, you mentioned. But there is something else when you are fully immersed in the grassroots work. And I would like to hear that experience from you, from the personal to the community, Ramya. How has been this experience, and what does it mean for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think something that became evident to us very early on in the pandemic was that it was dynamic, it was changing constantly, and therefore there was a need for us to iterate our working models constantly so that every piece of data that was coming in would be able to inform our implementation. And that was very vital, and there was a vital need for theory in this framework. When you have to iterate your working models again and again, where there were new regulations about guidelines, there were new regulations about social distancing, about masking, about quarantine, there was a need for us to keep adapting to the newest situation, and thus the newest requirements and needs of the people on the ground. So that's pretty much a haven for research, to be able to be in the grassroots in a constantly, fluidly, dynamically changing environment where you have access to primary data, where you have access to a population size of, we have worked with nearly 70,000 children that we have in our population. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been able to reach out to 35,000 of them. And this is the base with which we have worked and reached out to. This has been such an incredible opportunity because I think that Dr. Vinu talked again and again about the importance of the local. Right now, you and I are having a conversation across countries, and global knowledge and global thinking always informs our work, but our work has always been rooted in the local experience, in data that is immediately available to us in our surroundings, and data that comes from the people that we work for. I think one of the most beautiful things about doing grassroots level work for a researcher, for a developmental professional, is to be able to see the tangible impact of the work that you do on the people that you work for. I think that that's so valuable. But in addition to that, I think that because of this dynamically changing environment, and because we had the pulse of the people, our feet were on the ground, our hands were in the field, and our ears were on the ground, we were able to assess the very immediate needs of people. And several times that actually put our implementation of interventions ahead of even the government. Yesterday, one of our field staff came up to us, and they were telling us about the vaccination efforts that we've been doing. We've been running vaccination camps for, I think at this point, we would have vaccinated 2,000 people from the most vulnerable backgrounds. And she was telling us that even before the government announced this weekend that they would start taking vaccination doses to homes of the most vulnerable who could not travel, elders, people with disability, people who could not leave their homes, we had done that. We had done that because the field staff at the ashram, they have a very intimate knowledge of the people that they work for. This is a function, of course, of working in the field, but also a function of the deep empathy, of the humanity, of the collective responsibility that this team feels, their duty almost to serve the people in this in this community. So these were some of the benefits that we have of working in the grassroots level. And of course, when you work so closely with people, when you're able to see them face to face, you feel very intensely. But that actually enables you to look more intently at the work that you're doing. And thus comes the component of research and of evidence and of analysis and of deconstruction that we do. I feel like this conversation is almost a sort of deconstruction of the work and a deconstruction of the role, the model of the ashram. And it's because we have this ability to feel so intensely that we can look that deeply and intently. The opportunity to research is at our doorstep, both literally and figuratively. And I think that another very important aspect of grassroots level work is that the qualitative nature of research will stay with you. This is something that Dr. Vinu has told me from the time that I started here, is that when you work at scale, you see numbers on sheets of paper, and it's important, of course, for you to be able to look at data from a bird's eye point of view, to be able to affect people at scale. But to have that connect, to look at a sheet of paper and know that every single number has a face to it, I think that's invaluable. And I can't really describe exactly how that translates into the work that you do, but it does. There is an added sense of empathy. There is a greater sense of responsibility when you realize that these people are actually people. And so much of the work that we do is with children, and I think there's no greater joy than to be able to work and see the benefit of that work manifest in the lives of children. And Maria Lucia, I'd just like to say one more thing about doing grassroots level work that we've been doing here. We have managed to reach, as I said, 35,000 children, and consequently their families as well, vaccinated 2,000 people. And this work was done by Shanti Ashram, of course, and the International Center for Child and Public Health. But it was also done with 112 partners that we have around the world from 28 different countries. These partners are from the government. They're organizations like Arigatou. They are from non-governmental multilateral organizations. And over the last year, we have deeply understood the importance of what we have discussed several times, the convening role. So convening is, you are a master convener in your own right, Maria Lucia, and Arigatou International brings so many incredible organizations together. Convening, very simply put, is the ability to bring people together, to share information, build alignment, and to create solutions. And one of the predictors of successful convening, this is from an analysis done by the World Bank. They said that one of the predictors of successful convening is when issues align with core goals and mandates. And I think that has been lived and realized over the last year by both of our organizations. The issue at hand has been, as Dr. Vinu said, children. Children have been the invisible face of this pandemic. They have suffered. There have been 550 days of school closures in many parts of the world. And children have been the issue that we have focused on. And children also happen to be our core goals. They have the attention to children, the focus on children, has been part of our core goals and mandates. So when these things align, when organizations that share these similar beliefs come together, the convening that is a product of that is successful, it is powerful, and it is impactful. So very happy to be speaking with you. You support so much of our grassroots level work, and very grateful for that.
Ramya, this is very good to hear how the experience doing what you are passionate about, doing research, and this has also have an impact on you. I remember back in 2004, when I lived in Sri Lanka, and I might have been maybe the same age as you are now at that time, 17 years ago, and the tsunami happened in Sri Lanka. And I was coming from, I studied finance and international relations. So I was not, I didn't study to be in the field and work with, on humanitarian response in a way. But when the tsunami happened in Sri Lanka, the sense of, the need to go and help those in need kind of awoken in me. It was so much like it awoken something in me that I didn't know existed so much in me. And that's what you said, the sense of empathy. I woke up every day during after the tsunami happened, during that maybe 2-3 months after, really willing to do relief work, to go and help others, and collecting food, collecting items, going into lorries and delivering food. And it awoken so much in me, Ramya, in the sense of this higher responsibility. And I would like to hear, Ramya, for you as a person, as a young person, all the pandemic and this grassroots work that you have been doing in the midst of the pandemic, if you do some kind of meta-analysis or meta-reflection, and you take yourself out, what would you say has been a transformation in Ramya with this situation, a personal transformation?
I think personal transformation, Maria Lucia, has been on two fronts. So the first has actually been, for me, this has been an opportunity and a time for me to be able to reconnect with India in a way that I have never experienced before. I grew up very privileged, and I think that with that privilege comes a great disconnect between those who were born with plenty and those who were not. This is not because of any inherent goodness within us. This is not because of anything that we possess in excess of the other. It's just a matter of chance and a matter of luck. And this injustice, I think a lot of children face and a lot of children see when they're growing up in India, a country with so much income and wealth disparity. And in many ways, you spoke of this, Dr. Vinu spoke of this, we grew up shielded. We grew up shielded from this world where there was deep inequity, there was hunger, there was poverty, there was death and deprivation, disease. And I think that in the last year, the personal transformation for me has been a reconnection to all of this. Working in the grassroots, working in an organization that has a generational commitment to the upliftment of the most vulnerable has been a transformative experience, of course, professionally, because it's informed the way that I'm going to pursue my career in the future. But personally as well, it has allowed me to reconnect with this country in a way that I never knew before. And I guess find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. I always knew that this was the sector that I wanted to work in. And it was always important for me to be able to, like I said, we're born into this world through sheer luck and chance, and the plate that we are given is not determined by anything that we inherently possess. So I think that I have always thought that it was my duty to be able to reach out my hand out and help uplift the other next to me. So I always had this sense of purpose, but I think working in the grassroots, working with these people, has made that sense of purpose only deeper, and it's going to make me a better professional. I think Dr. Vinu talked about how in her parents' generation there was very little divide between the personal life and the professional life. And I see that lived in her as well, not in a way that inhibits you from paying attention to yourself as a person, but in a way that lets you flourish through your profession as a person, for you to find fulfillment as a person through your profession. So I think reconnecting with my country in a very deep, meaningful, and beautiful way, and for me to be able to realize my purpose even more deeply through my profession, have been the ways that this time has shaped me.
Thank you for sharing this, Ramya, and I really appreciate that you say that in a way that connects with this what we call the spiritual development, and that we do a lot when we talk about ethics education, on how this sense of purpose builds on this spirituality in a way. It builds your sense of responsibility, as we were talking before with Vinu, right? Ramya, before you were sharing a lot on the work that you have been doing with Shanti Ashram, the research, the practice, and you were close to the communities, to the children. What kind of impacts did you see in children due to the pandemic? And we have heard a lot of negative impacts on children. And I want to hear maybe some of them, but I also want to hear, any positive impacts that, in a way, you saw in the children that were part of the communities that Shanti Ashram serves.
Absolutely. I think it's the last 550 days has been a very grim period in the lives of children, especially the most underprivileged children, because the impact of the pandemic has fallen disproportionately on their shoulders. More rural children and underprivileged children go to government schools that remain closed to this day. Dr. Vinu talked about the government school in India being a health implementing infrastructure. And when children don't go to government schools, they lose more than 1/3 of their nutritional supplementation for the day that was initially provided to them by the midday meal. They lose the site at which they are promoted to adopt health measures like vaccinations, and they lose a safe space and a space where they can be themselves and be in the company of peers. They lose a sense of socialization, and they go back to homes, Maria Lucia, many times that are just one room. They go back to homes where there are frustrated parents. Many of them turn to alcoholism, leading to an increase in violence against women, but also increase in abuse against children. This is physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. We have heard reports from the field of these increases, and it has been heartbreaking to see how the last 550 days has impacted children. There hasn't just been a stop in their development and their learning. There has actually been a regression as well. We know that 53% of children from low and middle income countries currently live in what we call learning poverty, which is where children cannot read and comprehend a basic block of text before the age of 10. And we know what this impacts. We know that education is a precursor of future earning. We know that for every extra year children spend in school, they earn 8 to 10% more in their adult life. We know these numbers, and we have seen, unfortunately, a regression in the lives of children, a regression in their learning, and a regression in their education. But on the flip side, we have also seen that when remedial measures are taken, when organizations such as Arigatou International and Shanti Ashram step together and say that we cannot allow these hard-earned gains to be wasted away by a pandemic, when we put our foots forward and we realize that we have the ability to impact the children, at least in our immediate circles of influence. We have seen children flourish. I think this is a word you've used, a word that Dr. Aram has used. Children have flourished. Shanti Ashram has been working in this service area now for 35 years. And we now see children who started in the Bala Shanti program at the age of 2 and 3, starting college. And one of these very special children just applied for and started his PhD in the middle of the pandemic. That is just an incredible success story. And another one of our students, who was a Bala Shanti alumnus, is in the middle of an undergraduate degree in mathematics. And he recently topped his class in his final exams. And I think that these children are products and examples of a system that works, but they are also they are products of this collective responsibility, of course, that Shanti Ashram took. But in their own right, they have become proponents and people who empower others because they realize their individual responsibility in making the world a better place. And here I bring in the concept of leadership. You said the Shanti Ashram is an organization that builds leaders. Dr. Vinu has talked about this, and that is true. And I have seen it in the time that I have been here. These are young children who have spent their entire lives living in rural communities without the resources that they so rightly deserve, but from the help of their bigger family, from the help of governments, from the help of organizations such as ours, they have managed to build immense resilience over the last 1 year. And we know that this resilience that comes from facing and overcoming crisis is something that they are not facing for the first time. We talk about the pandemic in terms like unprecedented and never having been, we've never seen poverty like this before, hunger like this before, deprivation like this before. But for so many of the children we've worked with, that has been a majority experience for them. Most of their lives has been in some manner of crisis or the other. And the resilience that they have developed over the course of their lives, of course aided by help that they have gotten from organizations, has manifested in them assuming this individual responsibility, realizing that, okay, there has been a disruption to education. What can I do now to make my situation better? and they feel empowered to come and ask for help. They feel empowered to say that I need help, I need you to help me do this, and in turn they help somebody else. And I think that has been a truly remarkable thing for me to see over the course of the last year.
Ramya, that's I think a very important point when you say that, you know, the vulnerabilities we saw in children during this time existed already for many children that are at risk in many cases, that suffer so many violations of the rights in a way. And I think, as you rightly said, the pandemic in a way showed more deeply and made more visible those violations of the rights. I think similarly, Ramya, I think here in this part of the world, in Europe, where I live, I think the pandemic has made us also more empathic to the needs of others. You know, never before people were restricted of freedom as it happened during this period, where they couldn't go out, where they have to, you know, raise their children at home without any, you know, support, where you were restricted to go out and do things, where you couldn't go and shop, where you couldn't go and do things that you were used to do. And I think that when you talk about privileges as well in the beginning, you know, I think that for me has been a realization in this period, that we complain with all these restrictions and the pandemic affecting us in a part of the world where we have the possibilities in a way to survive, to deal with all these things. And we realize, you know, what it means for someone who is in daily life going through these things without the possibilities and the resources that we actually have in this part of the world. So I do think, and I mean, echoing also in the beginning when we were talking about this collective responsibility with Vino, is the sense of solidarity that has become so apparent and important with the pandemic between, you know, everyone around the world, this sense of common humanity. And you mentioned all these impacts, Ramya, on children and young people, and we know that one of the main impacts has been mental health on children and young people. You know, the physical distancing, the restrictions, the violence, as you mentioned, that some of them have to go through. And I want to hear you, Ramya, as an individual, as a person, how did you protect yourself, you know, from all this going on at the more this level? We all, I think, we have all gone through some mental health challenges in this period. As a young person, how did you nourish yourself, Ramya, during this period, you know, and deal with maybe, you know, mental health issues that we were, you know, we were all exposed to, you know, or we have been exposed to during this time?
So I think, Maria Lucia, one of the deep privileges and one of the great benefits that this last year has given me, professionally, personally, but in reference to your particular question, that has protected my mental health, was my ability to come to work every day at the ashram. We were able to stay open and function in our physical location because we were working on the front lines and we had gotten the permission from the government to do so. And I think that being able to find purpose, being able to realize that this was a situation that was overwhelmingly difficult for so many millions of people around the world. I think the current numbers are that 220 million people around the world have tested positive, and 33 million of them are in India. At the peak of the second wave in India, 4,000 people were testing positive every single day, and 400 of them were dying every single day. And that is a frightening statistic. We were measuring those numbers on a daily basis, because I think that one thing that Dr. Vino tried to make sure she communicated in all of her messaging was that we are still in the heart of this. These are the numbers, this is the reality, this is what it looks like on the ground. So to be faced with that number every day, to be faced by the situation, to be getting calls to the ashram saying that I need a hospital bed, I need oxygen, this is what I need, my father has passed away, my relative is in the hospital, what can I do? It was, like you said, a pretty, for your mental health, that can be a little bit overwhelming. But at the same time, I was in a place that runs on the ethos of love, of empathy, of care, of compassion. These are the pillars around which Shanti Ashram was formed. This is, of course, a creative laboratory where people come to find solutions for the problems of people, but these solutions are a function of the care and the compassion and the love that they have for the people that they serve. And that's not just restricted to the population that we provide service to, but also to the employees who work here. And I think that being able to work with this wonderful team at Shanti Ashram, being able to work with Dr. Vinu, and of course going into the field and being able to see the tangible impact that our work made in the lives of other people, it brought me through this time. It gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me a sense of deep, deep, deep satisfaction. And of course, overwhelmed me with gratitude every time I was able to wake up in the morning, come to work, and say, "Here I am again. I'm alive. I'm healthy, and this is a blessing in a time that was as difficult as this."
Thank you, Ramya. And I think now how you finish in a way connects us to the topic of this dialogue on ethics education. And Vinu was saying before that ethics education is not just the formal education, but it's the family, it's the community, it's all these kind of different places in a way where learning takes place, where you connect with one another. And I kind of see that in this dialogue with you, how the community, the personal level, the mentoring, the inspiring stories, your professional life, all in a way kind of a convergence of this, in a way, ethics and learning through this upholding that collective responsibility, but also individual responsibility as a human being. And I think that takes us to the end of this dialogue, Ramya, and I would like to invite Vinu again on the importance of education today. An education that is not just the formal education, because as Vinu said, is the education that happens at home. And we saw during this period in the pandemic, the importance of parents and caregivers and the community for the support of children. And so that critical role that education has today for the flourishing of humankind, but also for the construction of more peaceful and inclusive societies, as we have seen during these times. So, Vinu, I want to welcome you back for some closing remarks. And as I just mentioned, for me, this is ethics education in action. Is the nourishing, the spaces that are created for young people to be themselves, to develop this sense of purpose, to connect to their roots in a way, as Ramya was saying, to connect to themselves, and having this support. And I like, Ramya, what you said at the end, what also recalls what Vinu was saying, waking up every day with a sense of purpose, waking up every day to go, I'm doing something for others. And I think that this connection between what we call ethics education and spirituality, that connection to the sense of belonging and the sense of purpose and the sense of being in a world that at times is so disconnected. And so I'm happy to hear these reflections, but I also want to hear, Vinu, some final thoughts when you hear Ramya, when you think of what the world is going through today, and the hope in a way that I think is a critical word today, the hope that we have for the future, for our children, and for the present as well, for the future, but the present as well. If I ask you, Vinu, what are those thoughts now in a place of more personal reflection? What would be those thoughts, Vinu?
The first would be one that is immersed in reality. The COVID-19 pandemic is not over. The dashboard of numbers are still moving. We do have new challenges, not just of an unequal world, but also at a very practical level, the inequity in vaccine distribution, which today is one of the, what we have in hand as a positive disruptor. So one is just the work at hand today. And that for me as a public health professional, I think is key. The second is I am beginning to see, Maria Lucia, with the conversation and the first classes opening in India, a little bit of hope. You know, you need hope to go through these dark times. And to see children back with uniforms, parents talking about school bags in school time, is hope personified. Because I think that's one of the great gifts when you work with children. You think of today, but you also think of tomorrow. And there again, the larger role that all of us have to play. This is a global crisis that has affected children equally. In the developed world, in the underdeveloped world, you know, however you want to kind of look at the world, I think it's there. So there is hope. And the great joy for me, Maria Lucia, is that this 550 days have given us some amazing young leaders, both from the community of children and from the community of young people. So we are together. We're together. We should not forget that the building back better will only be possible if we truly believe that it will be a collaborative work. Governments and all societal institutions have to come together. So this is a sign of hope for me. The third thing, Maria Lucia, is throughout the pandemic, you started the first leaders dialogue, if you remember. I knew how lonely it was for leaders to take upon the responsibility of working, of generating new ideas, of responding at almost an emergency crisis mode, and yet having to be calm and stable and having to deal with all of it. And I have felt just like the community needs support to be a community. I have found my rationale in investing in young leaders and leaders. Today what I saw, I feel, is almost a wonderful sort of intergenerational framework of women leaders speaking here. We give and take. We give and take, we learn from each other. And so I think as a very personal commitment, continue to invest in leaders. There is work to be done on that front. We have to give new leadership models to the world, Maria Lucia. The principle of subsidiarity, empowering the last person of the team who are close to the grassroots. We have underinvested in it. And when the pandemic broke out, suddenly they had to take decisions in a way that we expected them to be of global standard. So investing in leadership which is global local, investing in building of leaders. Leadership doesn't happen overnight. You learn there's an experiential dimension, there's a capacity building dimension, there's a dimension of inspiration. And that is what I take away from this dialogue and my experience, not just during the pandemic, Maria Lucia, in the way that you asked me questions. I went back to my parents, but remember, every time I speak of my parents, I speak of their generation. Every time I speak on behalf of my generation, I speak of multiple voices, diverse voices who have made this world a better place because they did what they did. And I want the same freedom for the next generation to be able to take that. So there's an investment, leadership investment that I want to make. There's another one that I hope I can lend my moral voice to, and that is the voice of continuing to work for a peaceful and a more just world. It is absolutely unacceptable in the midst of plenty, and the 21st century, thanks to science, thanks to governance, thanks to global interaction, we have so much wealth. And why should we underinvest in children? Knowing that they are our most precious blessings in the present, and they will represent the humanity that we are proud to belong to tomorrow. How could we have done this before the pandemic? How could we still do this in the middle of the pandemic? And I hope we will not allow ourselves in the post-pandemic situation, whenever that starts, beginning now, is the emergency call to invest in children. 2 billion of them out of the 7 billion people. I mean, they deserve our care, our love, but hey, you know, you have to put the resources behind what you believe in. So I hope my moral voice is clearer. Evidence and research from wonderful young people like Ramya and a whole community of global researchers. This evidence, but also the voice of observation and personal encounter at the ground level. I can combine these two and then bring it to bigger platforms. Investments are low, and I want to track the investments for children. Maria Lucia, most of all, what this pandemic has shown me is you might not have an answer all the time. You might not be able to even support everyone who has sought your help. What you have in you is the ability to care for someone. It takes no money, it takes no resource, it doesn't even take any skill. It just requires an open heart. And therefore, I think the wonderful words of my father, I always remember that it is important to think of yourself as part of the solution, to think of yourself as a positive resource to peace building, and not to think of yourself as part of the problem. And of course, he and my mother together always brought these wonderful words of Mahatma Gandhi. And I think it's been, for me, a reality check. And the reality check has been in an intergenerational framework to be able to understand in a very gentle way, you can indeed shake the world.
Beautiful, Vino, for ending with these beautiful words. And I would like Ramya, in a very few words, a message, Ramya, for the young people like you, but also the younger generations. If there are some reflections from your side, Ramya, what would you tell these younger generations, but also your peers and the young people like you?
I think that in the world we live in today, it's very easy to become pessimistic as a young person, because we are bombarded by an overload of information. The world seems to be objectively getting worse because the news and the media highlights the worst things that are happening in our world today. But I think that there is no better time and there is no more important of a time to be an optimist than today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Like Dr. Vinu said, we have to be part of the solution. If we want to envision a better future for ourselves, we have to become part of building that future. And I want to say that every single person has the ability to affect change.
Absolutely.
There's no contribution that is too small. There is no one who cannot contribute to the world and the fabric of the world that we live in today. So to my peers, to the ones who are younger than me, whatever it is you want to accomplish, believe that you can, because you absolutely will. And there are wonderful role models and mentors from the generation above us who will support us in every step that we take. And I have had the privilege of interacting with so many of them, Dr. Vinu being one, a monumental figure in my life. And I can vouch for the older generation's support for our endeavors. And I can vouch for my generation's pursuit of excellence in this aspect as well. So in the most iconic words of Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Truer words have never been said.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, enriching dialogue, and as you said, Vinu, between women in trying to exercise change through the different spaces that we work with. And as always, it's inspiring to hear from you. And I have been inspired during the last year that I have seen and not met personally Ramya, but seen. I've been inspired by the leadership, the commitment, the service, and this capacity to really connect with people through the dialogues that we have had, and we have experienced this here on this dialogue. So thank you so much, Vino. I hope that the ones that are listening to this dialogue will be equally inspired, and that the excellent work that you are doing in India and beyond India continues with the same power, the same inspiration, the same commitment, but also with more investment and more impact on the children that you are serving. So thank you so much.
Together for Children, Maria Lucia, science, society, spirituality, and the entire of our societies together for children.